Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, AmTrust Title, Customers Bank, Ariel Property Advisors, Capital One Bank, Sterling National Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Meridian Capital Group. Additional funding has been provided by grants from Amarant Bank, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, B6 Real Estate Advisors, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Citizens Bank, Collins Building Services, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatidis Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Matone Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, RPW Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merringore Family Foundation, and these friends. It's called Westchester. It's a neighborhood that everybody wants to be in. So people from New York City are living in Westchester and then taking the commute down. So what's really happening in residential development? I've assembled a group of business leaders to provide their insight on development taking place in Westchester County. My guest is a normal guest who's been on a couple of times this season, Seth Pinsky, the Executive Vice President for Development at RXR Realty. Charles Epstein, who is the Vice President for Development at LMC, a Lennar company. Jonathan Gertman, who is the Vice President of Development, NRP. And last but not least, Andrew Weisz, who's the Vice President, we'll even say Development, but you're both Development and Vice President at the RPW Group. So here's the question. RPW Group owns all this office property in Westchester, office building in Manhattan. Why do you want to get involved with the Westchester residential community?
Yeah, we think it's a really interesting time in Westchester. The office market has shrunk by about 4.5, 5 million feet in the past figure of 7 to 10 years. And we think there's just an incredible demand for good quality residential units. We haven't built a single apartment yet in our 40-year history. But we think now is the time, and we found a right partner with Jonathan and the NRP group to do our first project. We're building 303 units in White Plains.
These are 5-story buildings,
Three
right?
5-story buildings. And it's going to be a mixed use. So we have an existing 600,000-foot office building, 1133 Westchester. These 3 buildings are going to essentially front the office building. And there's going to be a lot of efficiencies. There's a cafeteria, there's a gym, there's a daycare center in the office building. So the 2 uses really play off very nicely with each other.
So why is the Cleveland company, who had one time decided to go into Mount Vernon, which we'll get into in a second, decided that they believe that White Plains is the right neighborhood for them?
Sure. So the NRP Group is a national developer. And we actually operate in both luxury and affordable housing space. We started in the affordable housing world. So last year we broke ground on 3,500 units nationally. We're the general contractor for most of that, and also manage a portfolio of 20,000 units. So 2 years ago, I opened our New York City office, New York, to cover the metro area, and we want to be in high barrier to entry, high income markets. So Westchester, it's a county of 1 million people. It's an average, the HUD AMI is $117,000, and it's very tough to get the approvals, even if it's gotten a little bit easier. So it's a really dynamic and obviously very attractive market if you're looking at areas where you want to be investing long term.
Now, the interesting situation is that you and Charles are also into Jersey City. So how do you look at the difference between Westchester and Jersey City on the residential development?
It has very similar attributes. Westchester has great proximity to employment, has great proximity to entertainment and retail. And when we're looking for development projects in this region, we're looking for areas that either have transit-oriented or walkability. And throughout Westchester, there's a great history there. There's great urban atmospheres. And that's where our target markets are thriving, are looking for. They're looking for that walkability in the urban areas, and Jersey City has it, White Plains, Yonkers, New Rochelle, and finding those opportunities where we could build around that walkability and the convenience of the local amenities is what we look for.
And a number of years ago, there was development in New Rochelle in the New Rock section and also the Avalon Bay over there. What took place that New Rochelle fell out of favor and that you've got very involved as the master developer in New Rochelle? What would you say?
Well, I think it was a combination of several factors. And first of all, you had the financial downturn, which really put a halt on development everywhere in Westchester, everywhere in the country. But Westchester was particularly hard hit, and you saw very little happening anywhere in the county for a number of years. I think also there were some real political issues in the city. The way that the zoning worked, every project had to go through a political process, and at a certain point, there was real tension between pro-development and anti-development members of the city council. And what the city eventually decided to do was bring in a master developer, and we were honored to play that role and work with the city to come up with a process that was far more predictable and that took politics out of the whole development approval process. And as a result of that now, I think you're seeing an increased focus on the city because all of the underlying strengths that had led to that original development wave are still there. And now you have a process that developers can look at and really predict how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, and it's having a great impact on the city, I think a very positive one.
That's something that Yonkers, White Plains, New Rochelle have been the leaders. I mean, in New Rochelle, RXR with their development commissioner, Luis Aragon, just did an incredible job of thinking, of taking the cities themselves saying, you know what, rental apartments aren't a bad word, but we're going to control our destiny, and taking the initiative to lay out what they wanted, and then letting developers, as Seth said, have that predictability. And that's been a sea change. I think it's going to be great.
Certain parts of Long Island had this problem that they wouldn't let you build because they were worried about the schools.
Right.
What do you expect the average age or the family size or the nature on your development?
Well, it's across the board, but I think globally the school kid issue has subsided a bit. People come to realize that there's a strong track record of data across the region that these places aren't, the fear of being overrun with school kids just isn't the reality based on the data. And the pilots also have gotten under control as well. I mean, the first movers in the early aughts got very long-term, very generous deals, and as more development happens and the market is more proven out and there's more data, the cities scale that back a little bit, and the development still works, and I think that becomes more acceptable to the community. I mean, Seth, you probably have a strong opinion on this.
I would say a couple of things. So first of all, I think that what a lot of communities are grappling with is the fact that the whole business model, so to speak, of the suburbs is broken. And what you have is the young people and empty nesters who are really the most attractive part of the workforce to growing companies. They're leaving the suburbs, moving into urban areas like New York. As a result of that, the tax base of these communities is flat or even shrinking, and that's putting a growing tax burden on the people who are remaining. I think what a lot of these communities are now coming to realize is that if they want to be able to fund their schools, if they want to be able to fund city services, they're going to have to grow in some way. And so densification and development around transit hubs where you're leaving the majority of the communities exactly as they are with the traditional suburban model is actually quite appealing. The The other thing that I would say in New Rochelle was that the city actually did a very smart thing as part of the rezoning. They hired a firm to look and to study not just who the likely residents of the development were going to be, looking at the data from other developments around the county, but they also looked at what the needs of the school district actually were. And so there are a whole series of payments that have to be made by developers that are enshrined in the zoning code that are meant to cover those needs, to ensure that whatever burden the development is placing on city services and community services, that will be covered by the development itself.
When we look into our markets, we don't really see school-age children in our projects. I mean, we're building more urban product, and we do analysis, and we do, for example, for White Plains, part of the seeker approval process was to do an economic impact study. And in that study, we are required to do a school-age study, and we look at school-age studies different ways. We use the typical Rutgers multiplier, or we look at other methods, and you don't really see school-age children. What we do see in our product, we do see a lot of non-school-age children. We see a lot more young families now because they are moving to these suburban urban nodes, and as a way they want to still stay in an urban environment, leave the hustle and bustle of Manhattan and the boroughs, but they want to be in this urban environment until they could find or save to purchase a home.
Let's talk about what you're doing, your White Plains project.
Yes. We have two projects in White Plains. We have a 434-unit mixed-use project right in the heart of White Plains. We call it Restaurant Row, right on Mamaroneck Avenue. And it's going to be two 15-story towers. We just started development on that project. And that's going to be geared to anywhere from young professionals all the way through empty nesters, with some also geared for young families with non-school age children. And we also have another project a couple blocks away, which will be 2 phases, total of 814 units. And that'll be 2 28-story towers.
Now, what's the size of the units that you're planning? Okay, I'm just trying to get an idea of the size of the units and the configuration that you're planning.
I'd say the average is about 900 feet or so. We're targeting more studios to 1 2 bedrooms, and a lot of outdoor space, outdoor terraces.
What age are your tenants going to be?
Really, I think it runs the gamut. I think we're expecting to see younger individuals that work at some of the corporations in the area, certainly empty nesters that want to downsize from the home, and then everything in between, young families leaving New York.
Do you see co-living taking place in these units, especially since you're renting up right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll certainly see some of that, probably less, at least at this point, than in New York City. I think one of the reasons why co-living is so popular in the city, there are really 2 reasons. One is among certain demographic groups, there's just a desire to have roommates and to live more socially. That presumably is the same in the suburbs as it is in the city. But the other is really pressure because of cost.
Right, but if you're having the co-living, right now in Manhattan, a studio, if you had to rent, it would be $2,600 to $3,200. If you're in a one-room, in a co-living situation, in a relatively new building like the one out in Long Island City that is 1/3 co-living, it's about $1,800. So there is a significant cost savings. So in essence, would you be adverse? Would LMC be adverse to co-living?
LMC, the way we design our product is to be adaptable. We design our 2-bedroom units to be split masters, as we call it. So it could be for a family or it could be for roommates. We actually added 3 bedrooms into our unit mix in White Plains due to the demand when we did a thorough analysis, because we saw that there was a high demand for 3 bedrooms but not enough supply. And we designed it similarly that could be for young families or for roommates. So the affordability issue is going to be is evident in all markets, and if someone not being able to afford a studio, they will be looking at a roommate situation, and we make sure our units are.
But here's my question more as developers. Certain owners do not want the co-living concept.
Well, I think that it's important to understand that the reason people are moving into these multifamily projects in suburban downtowns is as much a lifestyle choice as anything else. They're making the decision to leave the isolation of living in a single family home, to leave behind the need to jump in a car to get everything that you desire. And the lifestyle decision is in part a desire for community. And so, whether that's community within your unit, looking at roommates or a co-living situation, or community within the building itself, that creating that community is going to be the key to success in development in Westchester, just like it is in New York City. And so we're certainly open to looking at different types of living arrangements in our developments, including co-living, because we think that that's the direction that the market is heading in.
I think there's an interesting connection actually between how you see office space being built today and the residential mindset. Office space now is all about density. People want to collaborate. They want to be near each other. And I think the order of the day in terms of residential is sort of similar to that. People want to be near each other. They want to go home. They want to go to the living spaces.
So here's the question. There are many owners, okay, who are Tishman Speyer being one of them, who's taking some of their space and making it co-working space. In a similar manner, you have a property that you're building these buildings, these 5-story buildings, right near the office complex, right near a golf course, not far from the new Wegmans, but it's difficult to cross over 287 by walking over there. But you have the opportunity. Would you think that the RPW group might go into the co-working business on yourself, or at least to somebody who's a co-living company?
We actually we lease in Westchester, and in our building in the city we have co-working operators, so we're prohibited from doing it. But we've certainly thought about it in some of the projects that we're looking at to potentially acquire. It's definitely an interesting model to consider.
And we think people are going to work from home, not full time, but you're commuting to the city 3 days a week and you're working from home 2 days a week. That's becoming very common for our residents.
When you buy a monthly pass, I think you need to spend.
Well, so the nice thing is they can go across the street and work in the RPW building and use the amenities there. And you see people working in our common spaces, but they're not really. You can't build for the peak demand of people working from home in your residential building. So it's great to have the office building next door.
Well, I would say on that note, we see that trend of people working from home, and we agree with that, and we actually start trying to incorporate that into our amenities. So we look at doing co-working in spaces where we have conference rooms, areas, booths, private offices that residents could sign out for a time period or even rent on a monthly basis. But we recognize that we are seeing a larger number of people working from home, and we want to make sure we could accommodate that in our amenities. So either within our club rooms or a separate co-work environment, we try to make sure we incorporate that.
Now, when we talk about Westchester or Connecticut, we talk about transit-oriented developments. Your property and your property is not transit-oriented per se. Your property in Yonkers is transit-oriented because you're right at the train station. When people are renting, what's from your studies, are they adverse to having a shuttle bus to take them back and forth?
Well, our project in White Plains, the one that we just started under construction, that project is walkable. It's a 10-minute walk. Our other project's a couple blocks further, and we do see that there might be a need for a shuttle. However, we saw a stronger demand to be in a more walkable environment than to walk to the train. We see people wanting to be around the restaurants and the retail activity and the farmers markets on weekends. They want to be walkable to that versus being on the train in our specific markets.
Now, RXR's philosophy, is it transit-oriented or is it both?
Generally, we're focused on areas that are walkable to the trains, but it's important to understand that transit accessibility is desirable for a number of different reasons. You certainly have people who are either moving out of the city or are looking for places to live that allow them to commute into the city for work. But you also have a whole population of people who move into these multifamily projects in suburban downtowns who actually work in Westchester. People forget that there are hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs
Don't worry,
in Westchester.
we have a big office on
Well, no, it's absolutely.
Well aware.
But even for them, accessibility to New York is important. For example, lots of empty nesters who work up in Westchester, they want to be able to go into the city on the weekend and not have to drive. And so that transit connectivity, we think, is a big plus, and that's why many of our projects, including our big project in Yonkers, as well as our master development projects in New Rochelle, are within easy walking distance of the train stations.
What about Rybrook? Who's planning to think about Rybrook?
We have a 10-acre site in Rybrook that we've owned in conjunction with 800 Westchester Avenue, a large office building that we own. And we've just begun the process to build 150 units there. Little tougher than it has been in White Plains, but we like the demographic. We think it could be a really exciting project, but we're just in the initial phases.
Now, with the aging baby boomers, speaking for myself over here, many of the people who want to downsize, they want to sell their home, they want to capitalize on the profitability that they've made over there, or they don't have the need anymore, they want to make life easier.
Or they want to save money because of the tax changes.
Correct. Are we thinking of providing amenities for the senior citizens or the baby boomers who might be there for convenience purposes?
Yeah, we call it amenities arms race. I mean, we want to make sure our product is, I guess, the top of the market in terms of what we offer our residents. And we put a lot of emphasis into amenities nationwide. We look at providing amenities for all the target markets. And that's probably one of the more difficult parts of our job, is to fit in all those amenities. But we look at doing demonstration kitchens for cooking classes. We try to squeeze in as many amenities that fits different markets, and we focus a lot on our empty nesters and our non-age school children and our young professionals as well.
Michael, I would push back on that a little bit. I mean, I think that empty nester market sounds great, and it's there a little bit, but it's been pretty slow to materialize versus what we thought the demographics would be when you have 10,000 people a day turning 65. The reality of going from 4,000 square feet to 1,200 square feet, the process of having to sell your home and then go rent or figure out the logistics of that, and the fact that 70 isn't what it used to be. I mean, my father's 75, and the thought of moving into an apartment, I mean, he's still extremely, extremely active, thank God. So that market has been a little slower to materialize than I think everybody thought. Greystar, I would just say Greystar, did a big project, sort of, luxury rental apartments, moved aggressively into it, and I think it's been a little tougher go than expected.
Is it a senior housing development?
It's age restricted.
Yeah, I do think, though, that it's hard to imagine with all of the various pressures that come with home ownership that that population group is not going to want to move into a different type of housing arrangement at some point. And we are seeing it, maybe less in the suburbs so far, but you're seeing a lot of it in people coming from the suburbs and moving into the city to apartments. But I think, there's yet another demographic group that's overrepresented in these developments that often people don't think about, which creates a variety of ages and creates the challenges that you were describing in terms of accommodating different types of people with amenities, and that is divorced parents, many of whom want to stay in the same community as their kids, but they don't want to live in a large house by themselves if their kids only come to visit them on the weekends or whatever the arrangement is.
Yeah, that's a great market.
Which is specifically in Fort Lee, with the three new apartment buildings that were built in Fort Lee, called the Modern, and the other property built across the street. I would say statistically, since I've spoken to the owners, approximately a third of the apartments are divorcees living into the apartments. It's a convenience being there, near the family, also near the city, and so
They
on.
also like larger units as well.
Right. What about affordable housing? New York City's biggest problem is affordable housing. How are you, as developers, taking care of the affordability crisis in Westchester?
Well, I think there are two answers to that. One is that in most Westchester development, there's some level of affordability that's required. In New Rochelle, for example, it's a 10% affordable, 10% of the units have to be affordable to people at 80% of Westchester AMI. We're looking at working with an affordable housing developer to develop an all-affordable project right next to the train station.
What
in
about
Rochelle.
in,
But
in Yonkers?
in Yonkers, we have affordable units in that development as well, and the city now has an ordinance that requires about the same 10%. But there's an important point to be made, which is that Westchester and places like it actually serve an important role in keeping the region affordable, because even the market rate units that we're building in New Rochelle and Yonkers are renting for a fraction of what equivalent units would be renting for in the outer boroughs, let alone in Manhattan. And in fact, on a per square foot basis, the rents that we're underwriting would probably be considered affordable units within New York City. So that's an important part of the solution as well.
But I also just say we're lucky to be in New York State as far as being able to do pure affordable housing. I mean, the tax reform bill really hurt the tax credit market, which is the primary generator of seriously affordable housing.
Right.
And New York State has dedicated a lot of resources to building affordable housing.
What are you projecting your rents? I just want everybody to give me your rent for a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom. Projected, okay?
I would say the range is anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about right. We're probably in the high 4s for some of our 3 bedrooms and low 5s.
3 bedrooms.
Yeah, we're seeing a high demand for that.
Since you're in the market right now,
We're seeing similar thing. We're looking on average about dollar per square foot per month of about mid-3s in rents across the board.
so in essence, since my apple is over there, my shiny apple is shining for Westchester with development, and I think part of it is attributed to the fact that a lot of the office space has gone out of the market, as you were saying earlier before, that approximately 4 million of the 32 million is no longer there, so there are opportunities over there. Many companies, Westchester has become the healthcare capital of the country, I believe, and I think things are bright. I'd like to thank Seth, Charles, Jonathan, and Andrew, and I'll see you next week.